So welcome everyone, and if you don't mind, while we're waiting to get started again in a moment, you can share in chat where you are joining from and maybe your school, and that'd be great because obviously one of the things we want to do is have a conversation, and these issues, there's no answers here. This is an opportunity to explore and looking at different perspectives. So by all means, please share. Many of you may know each other, but otherwise, we could add to the network. We'll start in a moment.
Hey, Robert. Hey, Jennifer.
Hi, Steve. Hello, Ken. Good to see you. Hi, Carrie.
Mark. Hi, Jennifer. So fun to see you.
So fun to see you, too.
How's the Advis, Jennifer? Okay?
Very good. Thanks.
I guess I'll see you in about a week.
Yes. Yep.
We are about ready to start. Welcome, everyone. My name is Ken Spiro. I'm the president and founder of School Sims, and I am happy to welcome you to our webinar today on navigating post-COVID challenges in school leadership with Steve Piltch from the University of Pennsylvania. It's just in terms of the purpose that we have here. We talked about this idea of we titled it "Balancing Academic Needs with Social Emotional Demands." It could equally be balancing social emotional demands with academic needs, right? In terms of thinking about these things, thinking about the challenges of leadership in which there are trade-offs, right? There are things that are often, we have to make decisions about issues that are often conflicting with each other. And these kinds of things really require really good judgment on the one hand. And really on the other hand, for our own self-efficacy or well-being, we have to be resilient because there's always blowback. And really for us, at School Sims, the focus is all about the idea of experience being the best teacher, because judgment and resilience, although they are two of the most important skills of leaders, and I would suggest even for teachers, you can't teach either of them. The only way we get better at them is through experience. And the question is how do we provide scalable experience to our leaders, to our aspiring leaders, to our teachers, or anybody who's going to be student-facing, as well as other roles within schools, in order to help them make better decisions and also deal with the challenges that they're going to experience anyway. And therein lies the opportunity for simulations, which we'll get to. But first, I am honored to introduce Steve Piltch to this conversation. It has been an honor to work with him over the last number of years, but really bringing his, I'm guessing we're over 40 years of experience in schools, many years in leading an independent school, and now heading up the leadership program at the University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education. So I'm very happy to be able to introduce him, and we're going to have a conversation today and also allow for the opportunity for engagement with the audience. So please, we'll post some of the questions that we're going to talk about, but by all means, please post in chat other things that you'd like to cover or aspects of what we're going to be talking about. But by all means, please contribute to that, as we'd like to make this as much of a conversation as possible, because this is an ongoing opportunity to develop. And with that, Steve.
Thank you, Ken. And Ken, thank you for inviting me. I'm flattered to be able to be part of this discussion, an important one in all of our schools. Having had the privilege to lead a school for more than 25 years and to be in education, I wish that 40 was right. It's actually 45 plus now. Has provided wonderful opportunities to work with terrific people, some of whom are actually in this particular webinar, which I appreciate, so thank you. And the opportunity to keep thinking about the issues that are out there. Before we actually move in today, and those who know me won't be surprised that I'll say this, is I often say that educational leaders that, your contracts tell you what it is you're supposed to control. But ironically, it's how you respond to those things that you couldn't control that really dictate how your community comes together, uh, where things go, how you get graded. And we would be remiss, in my opinion, not to mention one of those. I've been incredibly saddened and blown away by what's happening in Israel over the last few days. It's an incredible tragedy. I don't want to be political at all, but the kidnapping, torturing, and murdering of innocent people, regardless of who they are or where they're from, is just completely reprehensible and inhumane. And it's something that all of our schools are dealing with right now as they're have the communities debating issues and feeling about it and all. And I'd appreciate it if we could just take a moment in memory of those who are lost and will be lost. And it may come back into our discussion as we go as just one piece of the kind of issue that heads of school and administrators face as they're dealing with issues and all. So we could just take a moment, if you don't mind, Kim.
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Ken, I know you're going to lead us into questions and those kinds of things, but the fact that people are in the room today to have this discussion is a great sign for all of us, because we know what an incredible impact the pandemic has had on students, on adults, on others, and we're going to be dealing with questions associated with it for many years to come. So you go from there, okay?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for your words. But I think that does lead to, that what you just said about the things that we can't control, and how we deal with those. That is we talk about social emotional needs, and, obviously the focus will go to students and how do we attend to the social emotional needs of our students. But equally important is the social emotional needs of our staff. And even maybe more important is the social emotional needs of our leaders, the administrators. With the research that's come out of Harvard and elsewhere, around loneliness and the opportunity for isolation on the job, these are the kinds of things that they shorten your life. And anything that can be done to ease that, anything that can be done, whether it's just knowing you're not alone, and that others share in the challenges that you're experiencing, looks different, it plays out different, but that there is that opportunity for networking and for collaboration, but also the opportunity to have a good way of thinking. Again, you're not going to get it right? Let's dismiss that from the get-go, but to make the best decision we can, and then be prepared for what's coming. And really, the only way to make that happen is, again, through experience. And we know that in our other high stakes industries, in the military, in aviation, in healthcare, right? You would never put any key professional in any of those fields into the field without hours and hours of simulation for just this reason, right? We either need you to be able to have the muscle memory on certain procedural things, because we can't have you thinking about, which button to push, but at the same time, you need to be able to exercise judgment when you're dealing with the unexpected, when you're dealing with those things that are out of your control, when you're dealing with those trade-offs. And so the opportunity to do something that allows for this kind of experience to provoke the mind, to provoke the thinking, to provoke the opportunity for decision-making is something that's key. And really that's what we're about. And again, we're very interested in people's feedback, and please, again, put in chat, if you will, where you're coming from, as we look to begin a conversation in this session, and obviously we'd be interested in continuing it beyond. But the opportunity to do what simulation provides, and again, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this right now, but really this opportunity to engage with your audiences wherever they are. The opportunity to engage in meaningful, recognizable, relevant experiences is what this modality really is all about. And just so you know, that we have developed over the last year a focused independent school library of experiences, if you will, at the leadership level, at the teacher level, et cetera. So in terms of being able to provide to independent schools this opportunity to engage internally with this kind of activity in addition to other things you might be doing. That's really what this is all about, and the work that we do. But really to turn this over to our objective today, which is as we think about this idea of coming out of the pandemic, which was right unprecedented, right? We've never seen anything like that, certainly not in our lifetimes. And the implications are deep and unknowable at this point, right? Some things we're seeing, some things we won't know for a while, but certainly education was a key area where it was very consequential, right? It upended how we teach, how we think about teaching, how we engage, whether it's teacher behavior, leadership behavior, whether it's student behavior, all these kinds of things really kind of were upended, leaving us in this challenge now that we're after it and we're trying to reorganize, leaves us in a place with a lot of questions. And this is what I was very excited to hear what Steve had to say in terms of some ideas that relate to this. But let's start with that first question. And by the way, please again, feel free to add questions in chat, either things that we can answer directly or that can be added to the conversation. But we're certainly looking forward to other ideas that you have about this. But Steve, how would you answer that first question?
Well, let me say that just before you do, your very prefacing was important. Though we have a number of our students who in SLP who happen to be on the webinar and others who have an association with it, and they know that the focus of our program revolves around the social emotional well-being and of in fact the adults in the room, and it talks about creating culturally responsive community. It talks about making sure from a social emotional perspective we're dealing with these things. And you can see as a result of not just what's happened overseas, but in all of these areas, why that's relevant. And it's why the well-being of the individual and of the leader and of the family is so fundamentally important. I'll move into this. What are the most common issues that schools seem to be facing? And let me say it's kind of evolved, and please, people jump in. Initially, when the pandemic happened, many people were particularly concerned about the academic fallout. Not wrongly, there has been academic fallout. You see that in both the public and independent on testing, independent schools on testing and other things in both math and literature, for example, in English. There's a significant lowering in scores, understanding, and performance of kids in many grades, pre-K through 12. But what people have found across the board is that with that, those things are often able to be made up through teaching and other things, that much of what was also lost was that sense of social emotional well-being, belonging, that defines the sense of community in most of our schools and leads to better learning. And we've seen that in our kids. You've heard lots of educators say, the kids don't know what the culture of this school is now. Well, the interesting bypart is that you have to learn the culture of the school. So it isn't simply the kids, but that the same thing, and I happen to be looking at Carrie and Robert and Christina because they're on my screen. It wasn't simply the children who lost that sense. Many of the adults in the community have been and are feeling a much greater sense of anxiety as a result of all of the issues that surfaced through the pandemic. And so if I were to move to the second question and put the two of those things together, the pandemic didn't create most of these issues, but it's certainly made them worse and led directly to the issues associated with deterioration of social emotional stuff and therefore academic performance. It's been a very interesting thing to say. And I'm curious, if anybody sees that differently, would love to hear it, but would love to hear people's perception of that. One of the only ways we've found to deal with it is to first acknowledge that these issues are there and develop real buy-in about what the approach is going to be to deal with both. And importantly, in this case, first, the belonging need for everybody in your schools. And then everything else that goes with it in developing community. And also, therefore, the atmosphere and practicality of what's happening in the classroom for the kids. If we want them to make up the academic side, we have to be understanding about where they are and find the best way to get them there. Now, there are a number of other issues that have surfaced, for example, have become more intense. Lots of issues associated with LB, with anything with associated with diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI, BJ plus stuff. The gender issue for many, when I say the gender issue, the practical reality of dealing with the gender question in many of our schools has gone from philosophical and or potentially a question to practical, because there are more students in many of our independent schools who are in that gender question for schools, so how they deal with them. So let me use one example. When I was the head of a school, we had a wonderful policy that we wrote about gender that everyone supported. Coming out of the pandemic, more students are identifying, and it raises the angst of more people, which shouldn't surprise you in a country that, if anything, has become more and more and more polarized. And that's a factor too that we've seen through the pandemic. And by the way, Ken, I do want to mention this on the gender piece. I thank Ken for a simulation put together that our cohort last summer went through, because it made it clear, one, how issues have surfaced that weren't even anticipated a few years ago. Two, suggested different strategies. And three, what was really nice as we got through it and talked through the way the sim went, how open Ken and the entire sim group was about, reworking a sim to make it more and more updated to deal with the issues as they come. And my last comment before I listen is to say, the nice part about Sims is it provides you the opportunity to, at times, deal with potential issues before you have to. And if there's anything I've learned as an educator over the years, is that every situation you have in, you want to be able to take 2 or 3 steps back and process what's going on, so you can consider the different possibilities, the implications of those possibilities, and work through what's going to be the most productive, effective way for you to reinforce the values and mission of your school in the most effective way. I'll pause. Does that make sense? Ken, do you mind? I think those are, would you mind dropping the questions for a minute so we could, so I could collectively look at people? Would that be okay?
Sure.
Right. First, thank you. First, did anything that I say in there seem off base or wrong? No?
Not to me.
Okay. So, maybe I can do this, you don't mind. Carrie, you're working with early ed people, is wonderful. I know from our discussions how we see this, but maybe you can take 1 minute and talk about how you've seen it and ask a question if you want to, but if not, that's okay too. Would you mind?
Oh, I don't mind at all. Yeah. So I am over here at the Washington Market School. We have 2 to 5-year-olds. And I can say that one of the key challenges that we are experiencing now, that I believe is as a result of COVID, is the parents.
Oh, thank you.
have a much different threshold for their child's pain or discomfort or pain. I'll leave it at pain. A threshold that is down here for somebody was mean to my child. Somebody made my child feel left out. My child got bumped into in the gym. And I think my speculation here is that our parents, our children here spent the first years of their lives in lockdown and didn't have any opportunity to be out in the world. And so now they're out in the world, and these parents have had to let go of their most precious gifts in all the land and hand them over and say, do it exactly as I would do it. While we ask them to trust us, right? An expression you never want to actually utter. You just want people to allow themselves to feel. But these folks were giving birth at a time when they were just petrified.
So, Care, thank you for that. But in context, let me say this. Those of us who are long-term educators understand, believe that on the social emotional well-being side, what's important as we're working on their belonging is also their development of resilience.
Yes.
And what Carrie's describing, by the way, isn't unique to the 3 to 6 year olds. Most people, and if you're not seeing it, are seeing this in their schools across the board, that children should just thrive. But what we all know is you learn as much from falling down and getting back up as you do, look, I use this analogy all the time. If you happen to be a soccer player and you fall down, but you don't get back up, what does it mean? It means either you're injured and coming out of the game, which is the last thing we want to happen in kids' lives, or the coach is taking you out of the game because you don't know how to get back up. Well, think about it. In our schools, and Christina, I'm looking at you dealing with similar age kids. Your kids fall all the time. Don't they have to get back up?
Right. And they push each other and they bite each other and they hit each other and they take each other's toys. And that is how we learn how to get along in the world.
And euphemistically, if not literally, that happens all the way through 12th grade, right? It happens for life, but we're talking about pre-K or K through 12. So it's an important issue. And I balance, by the way, when I think of belonging, I think of resilience as the complement of being able to make things work over time. So anybody else have an observation or a question in terms of what's already been said?
Well, I'll chime in. We actually were doing a project with the University of West Alabama, and they have a charter school on campus that is co-located with the School of Ed. And they observed it was the early, and the classroom that was right next to their offices was the early education class. And they heard a lot more crying
Right.
than they were used to coming out of that room. And these were pandemic babies. And so the opportunity for socialization wasn't there. And so, that just, things were, how do you go about doing that? And actually, the other question I wanted to ask is, when we think about leadership in schools and we think about all these challenges that our students are facing and have faced, but, you also mentioned that issue of community and the community amongst staff. I guess my question to you is how has this changed the role of the leader? Do you need those kinds of toys and things that the teachers can play with and learn how to play nicely together again? How has that changed? Or just when you talk about this idea of community in the school and formulating, is that a top-down? Has that changed to now be a little bit more grassroots? How has that changed in terms of your perception within?
First of all, great questions, Ken. Second of all, let me do this for 1 second before I attempt to at least introduce some thoughts about it. In its own way, the last time I saw something similar to where we are coming out of the pandemic was the result of 9/11. you saw a similar impact in schools created by within this, somewhat ironic that Israel is happening, right, in the context of what I'm saying, but where you saw communities lose similarly, and that's a year where our at schools, in the school I was at, and fellow heads of school watched their pre-K, kindergarten, first and second graders build buildings and knock them down with the Legos. It was a completely different place. And that some of that played out from that social emotional level, not just for the children, but for the adults too. And anybody who was here at that time will remember that. Well, fortunately, over time, people, students, children, whatever, resilience developed and became healthier. But that still impacts, people in the 25-year-old range right now. And in this particular instance, and I'd love to hear from some of our educators, that there seems to be a need to take a more conscious route to deal with the questions that you raised, Ken. That is, I'm not sure that top down is necessarily the answer, but I do think confidently that what you need is faculty, colleagues, staff. Forgive me, those who worked with me know I refer to everybody as colleagues, okay? Colleague buy-in for what you're going to do. There's more skepticism, there's more cynicism, there's more angst. And I tie those things not just to the pandemic. I tie those things to where we are. If you could see me, I have my arms out, because of the posturing and polarization in the country. And what many of our educators will realize is that in their schools, here's another thing that's really evident, is that people are much more clear when they feel unsafe and not belonging by virtue of espousing a given political perspective at a time in our country where there's not healthy dialogue across the population. I used to say that I believed that purpose of good quality education revolved around the development of critical thought skills and the ability to express them in spoken and written word, and always implicitly believed that listening to others' views was important. It's now something we talk about in a really active way, because it's the only way you can collaborate, cooperate, and move. And so we are hearing about contextually more and more teamwork that is being developed across the board in schools, and more collaboration and cooperation opportunities, working with outside consultants in some cases to help develop the skills necessary to move those things together. As what I said, is that consistent with people's experiences, or does it raise questions, or have I said anything that just seems off base?
If anybody would like to chime in, by all means.
Please jump in or ask a question or whatever. At least please don't hesitate. It's great to have people on, by the way.
I'll jump in. My name's Robert Runyon, associate head of school over at Basis Independent Brooklyn. It matches my experience somewhat uniquely, because I used to work at this school before the pandemic, and then I actually joined it after the pandemic in 2021. So I got the like the Rip Van Winkle version, where I wake up and everything's different. And so like the culture was one way, teachers wanted to stayed here late, like not because they needed to, because they wanted to be with their fellow colleagues and things like that. And they wanted to watch their students, or the students were coming in regularly to get additional help. And now it's rare. I'll be doing closing duty today, and I know I won't see any student unless they're in a club in the hallways after 5 o'clock today. And that's a major change, and it's something we've often discussed, and how to address that, or like, and what parts of it are a positive in that, I don't know, teachers are claiming work-life balance back and reclaiming work-life balance, or what parts of it have long-term negative implications for the students, and that, you know, teachers have to be goaded to go to a football game that is across the street.
And
Support their
Robert,
students.
isn't it also true from your perspective, you know, and others, that there's also seen in some schools some transition in the leaders where, you know, where the need to be right out there and open and honest and compassionate and understanding, but that's offset by the balance of getting things done, and sometimes the two get conflicted in terms of the way things are dealt with. Is that fair?
Oh yes, absolutely, yeah, and I've certainly seen. I wasn't in the position to make decisions at that time, but I've certainly seen times when people were more pushed to do that, and it didn't help matters much.
Good. I don't mean good that it's good, but this is one of the things too, Ken. Just one more reason, and I'm not on here to sell Sims per se. You know, I've loved the work we've done with it, but just one more reason, as leaders understand how complex the issues are, to be able to go through different possibilities. And I start here, Ken, where I start with that social emotional bent as being the umbrella. It's got to start with that, and then you can entertain the different options to get where you need to go to create both the best, safest, and also most effective response to some of these situations, some of which you may have contemplated, some of which you may not. And by the way, and I mentioned this, there are a number of different Sims that actually speak to the relational challenges that can occur within a school, whether it's among colleagues or with students or whatever, just a process to be able to do it. So I'd say that. Any comments or observations or questions, or have I missed in any way on things that we talked about? By the way, one of the things in the note card, if I have missed, please let us know, because that's an important part of what we're talking about, is having dialogue where it's trusting, it's caring. You can say what you're thinking. That's the best way to be able to get to the place with a culture of your, you know, your team, your school, your all can be such that you'll be healthiest, you'll be safest, and you'll be best. It all starts with that. Anybody, any comments or any questions or any observations?
I think back to my childhood and even to my kids, and I set my bar, you know, partly due to school I went to, but the objective, that what I came to realize is the most important thing to get out of school is a desire to learn.
Yeah.
Right? Because everything, again, I'm not an educator by trade, certainly not a formal educator. We're gonna learn these things, the important stuff. We're gonna learn it again and again and again. So the thing that's important to take with you is the desire to learn more, right? That curiosity, that interest, that realization that there is something on the other side of the hill that's worth taking a look at, and this is the place to do it. And you know, when you think about, obviously, you know, as one looks at the role of the leader and the climate that you're looking to create, and the challenge of, on the one hand, creating a climate that is developmental and engaging for teachers and other staff to be part of and to contribute to. But obviously, and especially as you mentioned, you know, in the current environment where the community obviously always includes the parents too, and the community, and there are differences of opinion that, as the leader, you need to contend with in the community. what are some of the ways that you can navigate all these, the various stages of community relative to creating an environment that students really want to come to?
Well, and that colleagues, faculty, staff want to be a part of.
Yeah.
And all. I think a lot more time, and maybe one of the administrators, current administrators wants to comment on that. I'm led to believe that with all of the challenges that are out there, that administrators may be spending more time dealing with the overload of perceived or real of faculty and staff, of the angst that they feel and all. By the way, those have long been concerns of people, not wrongly, but those are things where we know that in many schools, colleagues, my word again, have been asked to do more and more. And there's only so much they can do where they're feeling that their own well-being isn't compromised in a way. And what I'm saying is actually particularly relevant in systems where, and schools, both public and independent, where there may be a shortage of some open spots and other things because of teachers and coaches and others who have either left the school and or left the profession, so that there are some openings or some added things that people need to do. I think I'm right about that. Anybody on that? Anybody want to comment?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi everyone.
Hi.
My name is Ryan D. Roussel. I am a school leader of a two-time Blue Ribbon school in New Orleans area, and we're seeing all of these things. And I find myself, Steve, tapped in a way where I'm spending a lot of my time dealing with restorative circles and doing restorative justice in our schools, right? After the pandemic, we saw something that we never saw before in terms of socialization amongst our scholars and learning how to socialize again. And so we've been working on being less punitive and more restorative for our kids. And we're seeing it even, on the grounds today, while scholars are coming in not knowing how to navigate conflict. And so as a leader, I'm spending my time dealing with school culture and working on sustaining the excellence of our school, right? And it's taking me away from the most important work, and it's the data, right? And moving our kids to student achievement. And so to Ken's point, to your point, Steve, you guys are on it. And I encourage to keep this narrative going, and the dialogue going around strategies like the school leadership teams can take to the teachers, so teachers can, although teachers are doing a lot of heavy lifting right now, but maybe we need to get more training around restorative justice in our schools for our educators.
So, and somewhat, thank you. I really appreciated that perspective, and I'm a supporter of the restorative piece. And what you know is that as you're doing that, there are people in your community who aren't. There are those people who believe that you should be punitive and you should be whatever. That's not the point of what I'm going to say. But what I want to say is to you, Ryan, clearly a committed educator and others in the room, is that as you're dealing with these things more and more, you and others need to think about your own well-being as well, right? Because the added pressure to be able to do the things that you're talking about and others in the quote room are experiencing makes it a more complex and difficult job, And what I heard you say, and it may just be my bias, I'm admitting that, is that unfortunately it takes you away from the question which drives you, which is what's best for the kids and how do we help them develop from an academic, educational, social, emotional way that will be healthiest for them, and to develop skills that will allow them to deal with a more and more complex society. Was that fair? Did I? Okay.
That is so fair and well said. You hit it.
Yeah. Thank you. Anybody else? A comment, a question, an observation?
So one of the things I'd like to do, please feel free, if you have a question, please note it, and either you can put it in chat or we're going to come back to some questions. One of the things I wanted to do is, really to just what we just talked about, and thank you, Ryan. it is kind of, again, for us, and I'm sorry, I'm a carpenter with a hammer in my hand and everything looks like a simulation. I cannot for the life of me understand why everybody isn't simulating, because the goal of this modality, and it's not about the product, right? It's an opportunity to engage in these kinds of conversations, right? When I think of the role, I joke sometimes when I'm teaching that I've been doing simulations for near on 35 years now, so I know they work, right? This is something that, again, I live and breathe this kind of approach to this idea of experience. But when I look at the role of the school administrator, it is the most challenging. I think, actually, I say this with great affection and with great humility. It is the most pathetic leadership job I've ever seen. And the reason why I say that is because nowhere have I seen a job where the decisions and the responsibilities are so great and so complex, and it's exacerbated by a group of stakeholders whose demands are so exclusive of each other, and each one is more irrational than the next. So no matter what you do as an administrator, you're going to get whacked. So how does one operate in that realm? Ryan, so I imagine, just trying to imagine what it's like in your role as a leader. You know exactly what you need to do. And yet you have a community that will not stand for it, or elements of the community, right? So the question then becomes not the right thing to do, but what can you actually do to actually move the ball forward? Because, obviously getting fired isn't the answer, or doing something that creates the greatest resistance is not going to achieve anything. So navigating that kind of issue, well, again, that's why I feel humbled by, working with administrators, because this is and it's an ongoing thing, right? It's not a one and done, right? It's not, oh, let me just solve this and I'm good, right? Then you're just on to the next thing that is the same issue and contending with it. And so the opportunity to engage in this way is really what, for us, the concept of simulation is all about. And Ryan, if you wanted to say something in return, feel free to do so before because I want to demonstrate this.
Yeah. And I'll just say one thing that and I'm sure all of the school leaders on the call can attest to, coming out of the pandemic, you began to realize that, across America, we've been running into many pandemics, right? Um, but the pandemic in itself that I'm starting to see in my schools, and the way in which I know I work and strive and beat myself down and reflect on and make decisions on, is the moral pandemic that's going on within. He's doing right by our scholars. And I think sometimes, and most times, the day-to-day demands of our work, it may become increasingly transactional, if you will, right? And then bringing the right voices to the table, it demands work. It demands a pull on you, and you have to be committed to it. And I go back to the moral pandemic, to what you said around simulation, Ken, is sometimes the human experience doesn't bring morality into this, right? And I think that is the essence of our work, right? To teach moral competencies, to teach morality in our schools. That don't even exist anymore. But our role in we're making the decisions is ultimately, and what we're all talking about today, is just to do right by our scholars. And so that's the only thing I wanted to add, King.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
As well said, Ryan. Thank you. Your school is clearly fortunate to have you, as is the case here. And by the way, before Ken goes into this, that's one of the things where our systems are also falling short, is that as we're looking at heads of school, as we're and their families, as we're looking at principals, as we're looking even at superintendents, the lack of what I would call overt support from some of the people who need to show it. And you can talk about boards of trustees, school committees and others. Important thing to think about. And Ryan, let me say, is my hope is as Ken goes into this, the lessons that we learned through this pandemic become ingrained in us in a way that we actually become part of who we are, because there will be a next pandemic or something, or a next tragedy in Israel, or a next whatever that you're going to have to deal with, and that your community and your students are going to be impacted by. Go ahead, Ken.
No, that's all great. And really it's, the opportunity to take the wonderful scholarly content and frameworks and all the stuff that we teach that makes so much sense and is really helpful in terms of ways of framing problems and ways of framing relationships and leading or teaching, whatever the role is. Those are all wonderful. But then life intervenes, and life never presents in a way where you're starting from a starting point, right? Life, you're in the middle always, right? There's always something that came before and there's always something that comes after. You're never starting at zero. And so how do we capture situations in which you're going to have to exhibit or practice the wonderful frameworks, but in a muddy space, in a place where you have that board president who is, well, let's just say not aligned, or you've got a member of your staff who, as great as the ideas are, and as much the data demonstrates, and as much as what have you, they're just going to resist. And they're right now, they're who you have on staff, right? So, and obviously changes, that also has an impact. And navigating those kinds of things, simulation is a vehicle by which we can be nonlinear, by which we can present a mess, and we distinguish between teaching and experiencing, right? The teaching, you're already doing that. Experiencing isn't about getting it right? Because as we talked about, it's skinning your knee. It is falling down. It's all those same things we talked about before about our, the early education kids, right? The same things apply to adults, because those are the most potentially impactful learning opportunities that we have. And so this simulation, just as an example, and I won't get too deep into it, but if anybody's interested, please reach out.
Welcome to the Overcoming Resistance simulation created by SchoolSims. In this simulation, you will manage consensus and commitment to changes in a group with diverse perspectives and beliefs. You will be called upon to manage group members that are...
Okay, so we don't have to hear too much of that audio. But if you're interested in seeing more, we're more than happy to share the link and to obviously speak with you if this is something you'd like to see an opportunity to engage with in your schools. But again, to everything that we've been talking about, the goal is to create an opportunity where difference can manifest. The power of this modality, and hopefully actually I'm formulating our next webinar, which will be in November, to talk about the neuroscience of this modality. There's been a lot of research about what's going on in the brain when we're engaging with stories. And for those of you who haven't seen it, he's actually a Penn economist. Now he's at Claremont, Paul Zak. Did a lot of research on how stories affect the brain. And one of the things he posited, and then he went on to prove, is that it's the release of oxytocin. When we're engaged in a story, oxytocin is released in the brain. And one of the effects of that is that we feel more generous and trusting to the people we're engaged with. So if one engages in, even on a controversial topic, if you're feeling better about the people that you're actually sitting around a table with, dealing with the issue, there's actually an increased chance that you can actually have a meaningful conversation and see two sides of the issue or multiple sides of the issue and actually talk about it and engage in the problem solving from that perspective. And so the opportunity to harness the power of a story, and educators, right? It doesn't take much to engage educators because you're always thinking about education. So a story that is based in a context that's authentic, that's realistic, and so all the simulations are inspired by somebody's real experiences. That's really the power.
Always
and,
forward.
Again, one of the things that a feature of simulation is that it's life. So deal with it, right? There's no mulligans. There's no back button. There's no opportunity to, oh, no, that wasn't a good decision. Let me go back and do that again. No. Deal with it and roll with what happens, the consequence of the decision that you made.
No.
And obviously there's always time at play, right? If we had all the time in the world to consider, if we had, we might get it more of the time, maybe, but we are constrained and we do have to act in the moment, but it should always be thoughtful. So we don't want to be reactive. We don't want to be that deer in the headlights because that never goes well for the deer. And so the opportunity to engage in critical thinking and have that opportunity is important. And so we do is we want to put you into a context in which, again, you're going to be the head of school, but that's all we tell you about you because you're going to see yourself. And then if you're doing this in groups, if you're doing this synchronously, the opportunity to engage in a group of people who see themselves obviously differently, making decisions the way they would make it, that allows for the opportunity to engage in those kinds of meaningful conversations.
The school. Stony Brook Academy was established in 1975. It is a modern independent school with a very diverse population of students. It has developed a fine reputation in the community, has kept pace with growth, and has a very dedicated faculty and staff. The main competition for Stony Brook is a nearby private school that offers a cutting-edge, STEMS-heavy curriculum.
And so again, it's designed to be, well, it's not my building, but it could be. And you'll see video, I mean, at some point, I don't know if we're going to get there to meet the actual, what we're going to get into is an issue of, you need to advance your STEM program. And you've got a math head of the math department who is a bit of more of a traditional teacher. And he's very happy with the way he's doing things. And then the implications to the rest of the faculty, et cetera. And that's how, but you've got a board president who wants something else. And so you've got this opportunity to engage in a situation.
The community is very attractive, particularly to young, upward mobile families. Thus, much of the growth in the community has been young families. With this growth comes accompanying high expectations regarding the quality of education. A theme that Stony Brook's math department curriculum is considered boring and antiquated has been developing since you joined the school, and expectations of change are growing rapidly. The challenge. The school's mission statement was updated last year. After much discussion, the following was added. The school will prepare students to bring knowledge and skills to solve problems, make sense of information, and know how to gather and evaluate evidence to make decisions. These are the kinds of skills that students develop in science, technology, engineering, and math, including computer science. We will enhance our STEMS curriculum to meet these growing needs. You are challenged to align programs with this vision enhancement as quickly as possible.
So again, the opportunity to engage in discussion can happen at any point in time. And I don't want to, I just want to show you what a decision might look like. So here you have an initial choice. So now you're in the space, you're gathering this some initial information. You've been able to realize in terms of your insight in the program that the math department is not aligned. You're hearing from your board president. So what are you going to do? What's your first step that you're going to do from the standpoint of, from a leadership perspective, how you're going to navigate? And, it's a choose your own adventure. So the goal here, again, is to have an experience with navigating an increasingly complex decision tree. And at this point in time, if you're doing them synchronously, this would be an opportunity for conversation. Now, you may do this with your leadership team. This may be from the leadership team together with the teaching faculty or other members of staff in terms of their thinking, and really just to, again, provoke that opportunity for community building at the low end, if you will, because it doesn't have to be about anything. It's just that opportunity to come together. But it could also lead into strategic conversations about what you're doing in your own building. And the opportunity to engage in this way around a variety of topics, whatever the case may be, to come to consensus. So how do we go about making decisions on the team? Is it what the head of school says? Is it what we say collectively? These are all the kinds of subtle aspects of what happens in this kind of engagement where you may be doing these things in other modes as well. So in terms of being able to, as a strategic objective, to engage in a both developmental and team building way, which has the further benefit of reducing that isolation, the opportunity for well-being because you feel more connected, you feel like you're not alone, the opportunity to get insight. And one of our favorite statements we hear from students is, I never thought of it that way. And hearing that from a peer has much greater impact than hearing that from an instructor. So anyway, this is what a example of a simulation would be. If you'd make a choice, it takes you down a branch. We'd meet the board president. We get our charge. We're going to meet I can tell you that the head of the math department, Ira, he's a trip, and they're a lot of fun. And so with that, I want to turn it back to where we were. And Steve, we've come near the top of the hour. Want to open it up for questions and any closing comments from you, Steve, in terms of your thoughts?
Would you mind dropping it again? It would be great. That would be wonderful, just so I can see the people. Thank you. Do any of you have any questions or comments? You know, as an educator who's been blessed to, love 45 plus years in the business, I am especially appreciative of the good work that you're all doing and of your commitment to your kids and to your schools and all. And it's through this difficult time from the pandemic on and all the challenges, knowing that there are those who are appreciative and knowing that there are those who want to be committed to helping you, one, be the best you can be in terms of the processes you use and how you do it, and in terms of your own and your family's well-being, is a good thing to focus on as you move forward. And remember that push comes to shove, and I don't have the privilege to know all of you, but I do know a number of you, that it really is, as you would tell me if we were speaking individually, first and foremost about the children and their well-being, their development, and their experience, and that sense of community and culture that allows them and you and others to thrive. If there's any way that Ken or I or Sims can be of help, please don't hesitate. I will say this again. I want to thank Ken and his entire team, because I do think, used appropriately, the Sims don't solve the issue. They don't solve, but they provide you with a wonderful means by which to contemplate them in a really safe way. And I think that that's helpful today. And let me wish you and your families and your schools, most importantly, your kids, all the best, and hope that things settle in the world and that we can do this again and talk about issues in a positive and productive way. Thank you for joining this afternoon, Ken. Thank you for allowing me to be part of it. I will look forward to ongoing discussion. Some of you are going to have to suffer through some of those by virtue of your presence and stuff in our program, but thank you. Ken?
Yeah, thank you, Steve, very much. It's great. And again, all of our work together has always been great. And I really just wanted to, one other thing to add. I obviously would love to chat with all of you about your experiences, if this is something that's of interest, but also we are actively growing the independent school library. And Ryan, you mentioned restorative justice. We don't have a sim on that yet, but it's certainly an opportunity. And so if there are specific issues or problems of practice that you're seeing that you think would manifest well in this kind of approach, we'd be very interested in talking about it. And one of the things we have found is not only is our sims potentially developmental in and of themselves, but our formulating a sim is also developmental, because one of the things that we find is that often we label problems all the time, right? We give them a name because it makes it easier to talk about. But when it comes to the actual decision making in the moment at the granular level, it's not about that. It's something else, or some combination of things. And being able to articulate that combination of things in the context in which they manifest, and understanding not only those trade-offs, but what are the implications of decisions when they're made, when you choose a particular side of the trade-off, and what is the consequence, and how does that play out, and what are the implications in that stakeholder group, in the ripple effect, all of those things. If you can actually articulate all of that, it's actually pretty insightful. And so the process is fun as well. And so we'd love to engage in that kind of conversation with all of you. So please, and as Ryan had mentioned, actually, if you don't mind, we'd love to see this conversation continue. And so we look forward to an opportunity to engage with you again on whatever level. I'll put in chat my email address, but we can actually, if you're interested in connecting, can certainly take the QR code. But by all means, please feel free to reach out, and we very much look forward to connecting with you. Thank you all for your participation today. We'll stay on if you have additional questions. But at this point, thank you and best of luck in your roles and in your schools. And we look forward to connecting with you soon. Thank you again. And thank you, Steve, very much.
My
And
pleasure.
look forward to connecting with you again soon.
Thanks. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you.